Picture this, you're a young dairy maid in eastern Iceland, sometime in the 18th century. It's spring, you're walking across the high heath with a heavy bundle of butter on your back, on your way down to the market at Vopnafjörður. The sun is already low, your shoulders ache, and then at the edge of a small lake just off the path, you see a horse. Grey, standing alone, no rider, no halter, no farmer in sight. It looks at you, it's calm, it's tired, it is plainly a gift, so you walk over. You stroke its neck, you lift your bundle onto its back, and then you climb up. And in that moment, you feel something is very wrong. Your hands are stuck to its mane, your thighs are stuck to its back. The horse isn't standing still because it's tired. It was standing still because it was waiting for you to be on top. And then it turns. And then it starts to run, not toward the path, toward the lake. And 1 second before the water closes over your head, you finally see it. The hooves of this animal are pointing the wrong way. The tufts of hair on its fetlocks face backward. This is not a horse. That heath in eastern Iceland is still on the map today. It's called Smjørnavatsneiði, the Butter Lake Heath. Nobody ever found you, but everyone in this part of the country knows exactly who took you.
Tick down the hall. Great tales, call it by name. Great tales, shadows remain. Tick, 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 time keeps its stare. Great tales, something is there.
Hello and welcome to Great Tales. I'm your host Chris and I'm glad that you're here. Today we're going somewhere cold, somewhere wet. We're going to the lakes and rivers of Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, the Faroe Islands and Finland. And we're going to meet what might be the most human monster in the whole catalogue of European folklore. A creature that weeps, a creature that plays violin, a creature that sits naked on a rock in the moonlight and listens to you walking closer. His name is the Nøkken. And what you just heard was only one of its many shapes. And it has many though. This is the first half of a two-part story. By the end of episode 2, I'll tell you about the violin, about the bargain made at the North Flown waterfall on a Thursday night, about the 11th tune that no one is allowed to play. But before we get to any of that, we have to understand who we're actually dealing with. So pour yourself something warm, we're going to the water. The shape that has no shape. The first thing you need to know about this water spirit is that he doesn't have a body, at least not a fixed one. And that's already half of what makes him terrifying. He's a bearded old man with water dripping out of his beard. He's a naked young man sitting on a rock in the moonlight playing a fiddle. He's a grey horse with its hooves on backward. He's a pair of glowing eyes staring up from the lily pond in the forest. He's a slimy fish thing that looks stitched together out of rotten reeds. He's a capsized boat on the shore. He's a screaming bird in the rushes. He's a tree trunk that isn't quite a tree trunk. He's basically anything the surface of a lake can imitate. Medieval Icelanders had a technical word for this. In Snorri Sturluson's Edda, written about 1220, there is a rule about poetic imagery. If a poet built a metaphor whose pictures didn't fit together, it was bad poetry. They had a name for this offense. They called it nikrat, which translates roughly as nikret, shapeshifted, the way the nikr shapeshifts. Think about it. Already 800 years ago, this creature was so synonymous with metamorphosis that you could use his name as a verb that means scrambled. He wasn't a story you told children. He was a category of error in literary criticism. And his name, the name itself, runs even deeper than that. Norwegian Nøkken, Swedish Nekken, Danish Nøkke, Icelandic Nikor, Finnish Neki, the Old English Nikor that Beowulf fights 9 of in his swimming match with Breka, they all come from the same common Germanic root. And that root, in turn, comes from a Proto-Indo-European word meaning roughly to wash, to bathe. Cousin words survive in Sanskrit, in ancient Greek, in Old Irish. The deepest meaning of his name is, very simple, the one in the water. He's also closer to home than you think. In English, the devil is sometimes still called Old Nick. That's him. Same root. In Sussex, in southern England, there's a stretch of swampy ground called the Knucker Hole. Same root again. And of course in German we have the Nixe, the Lorelei, the Rhine maidens. They are all his sisters. The only difference is that south of the Baltic the gender is flipped. The water spirit becomes female. North of the Baltic he stayed male, naked, brooding, often carrying a violin. There's a small linguistic fossil that I really love because it puts him on every kitchen table in Scandinavia. The Swedish word for water lily is nekros, literally nøkrose. The Norwegian word is nokrose. The Finnish word for seashell is nekkinkenke, nøksju. Every time a Scandinavian child names one of those flowers, they're saying his name out loud. He's in the vocabulary. He's in the well. He's in the mill pond. He's in the small dark pool behind the farmhouse that you're absolutely not going to look at again tonight. Where he lives. We need to stop picturing water spirits as kings of the sea. The Nøkken isn't the god of the ocean. He isn't Aegir, the Norse personification of the sea, with his wife Ran dragging drowned men down in her net, and their 9 wave daughters circling the world. That is a different mythological layer, older, larger, grander. The Nøkken doesn't live in the ocean. The Nøkken lives in fresh water. And that is much worse, because fresh water comes home with you. He lives in the lake where you went fishing after school. He lives in the river where the path crosses the ford. He lives in the mill pond next to the village, where the same wheel has been turning the same water for 200 years, and where the water just behind that wheel is so dark that you can't see the bottom. He lives in the well where your mother fetches water in the morning. He lives in the mill race where the grain of the entire region passes through, and which, at the time these stories were being told, were the most dangerous places in a peasant child's daily life. More children drowned in Scandinavian mill ponds than in any other body of water. Women washing laundry by the river told their daughters stories about the man with the dripping beard. They didn't tell these stories out of love for folklore. They told them so the daughters would step back from the edge. And he changes shape. In Norway, he's usually a man with long hair, huge dark eyes and a beard that won't stop dripping. Sometimes he's a capsized boat. You weigh down to flip it back over and he pulls you under. And sometimes he's a screaming bird. Other times he's a piece of jewelry on the bank. A farm woman bends down, picks it up and never comes home. Sometimes he's a bull. Sometimes he's a beautiful woman. And often, very often, he's a grey or white horse. What Norwegians call the stromhest, the stream horse, or the vatnehest, the water horse. His scream has a name. In Norwegian, it's called the vaskrik, the warning cry. And if you hear it from a body of water, the tradition says somebody is going to drown there. Not necessarily today, maybe next week, maybe tonight. But somebody is going to walk down to that water and not coming back. In Sweden, he's slimmer, younger, more beautiful. He sits naked on a rock or a lily pad with a violin in his lap, his hair down to his waist. Sometimes he's a bearded old man instead. His horse form is the bekkahest, the brook horse. There's also a rarer feline version, the strömkat, the water cat. He prefers misty water, and his peak season is midsummer, the night when everyone in Scandinavia stays up and gets drunk and lights bonfires, and absolutely nobody believes anything bad can happen because the sky is still bright at midnight. In Iceland, he's almost always a horse, grey, sometimes black, but with the hooves on backwards and the fetlocks pointing the wrong way. There's exactly one shape that he can't fake, the curling horns of a young ram. So, if you're standing by an Icelandic lake and you're not sure whether the friendly grey horse beside you is real, look around for a lamb. If he could imitate a lamb, he'd already be doing it. His skin is sticky, like old glue. He can sire fowls on ordinary mares, but only if both animals are belly deep in the water. And in winter, when the lakes freeze and the ice cracks, that low, rolling, sub-bass boom you hear from a mile away, that's not the ice. That's him neighing. In Finland, he's the strangest. The Näkki is beautiful from the front and hideous from the back. Long hair, smooth skin, perfect face, and on the other side fur, weeds, claws, decay. Sometimes he's a slimy fishman, sometimes a woman with 3 breasts. If a body washes up in a Finnish lake and there are dark patches on the skin, those patches have a name. Nøkken sormenjäljet, the fingerprints of the Neki, proof that he held them under. You can spot him in human form if you know what to look for. Water that won't stop dripping from his beard or from the hem of his coat. Feet that don't match, one a hoof or both turning the wrong way. Fingers unnaturally cold or webbed at the base. The German Nix supposedly has a slit in one ear. The Nixe has a wet skirt hem that never dries. And all of them share one tell. They can't take their eyes off the nearest water. If you meet someone in a tavern who never lifts his gaze from his drink, maybe he's just a drinker. Or maybe he knows that the moment he looks up, the surface of his beer will start to ripple. The hour has come, but not the man. Now I want to tell you a story that gets retold from Norway all the way to Wales. Folklorists have a catalog number for it. They call it ML4050. The hour has come, but not the man. It goes like this. A man is crossing a mountain at dusk. He's near a lake. The sun has just gone down. The water below him is black and flat. And from the water, he hears a voice. Maybe it's a child's voice, maybe a woman's, maybe something he can't quite place. The voice sounds annoyed, almost impatient. And what it says is this. The hour has come, but not the man. He freezes, he doesn't understand the words, but he understands that he's just heard a sentence nobody should ever say. So he hurries on, and at the next farmhouse he stops to warn whoever's there. Minutes later, a rider comes pounding up from the road. No coat, just a shirt. Pale, soaked in sweat. His horse is in worse shape than he is. His face is wrong. His eyes don't focus on anything. He rides like he's being pulled, and he's heading straight for the lake. The farmers grab him. They drag him off the horse. They shout at him. He doesn't answer. He tears free. He runs down to the bank into the water. And he goes under without ever calling for help. The Scottish version of this story has a twist that's somehow even worse. The harvesters, knowing what's about to happen, lock the doomed rider inside a stone church. They bar the door. They stand outside and wait for the appointed hour to pass. When they finally open the door again, they find him drowned, inside the church, face down in a knee-deep stone water trough by the wall. That's the unforgiving logic of this thing. Locked doors don't help. A consecrated building doesn't help. If the water has been promised something, the water will collect. And there's the part that turns this from a campfire story into something much darker. We have actual numbers. In 19th century Sweden, around 40% of children died before the age of 15. In coastal northern Norway, drowning was the leading cause of death for adult men. On the fjord, on the open lakes, on the seas. Most Norwegians didn't learn to swim until well into the 20th century. The story of the hour and the man wasn't a tall tale. It was a way of explaining why, again and again, you'd find someone face down in shallow water with no wound and no struggle and no reason to be there. The Maid and the Furrow. Let me tell you 2 more stories before we close out part 1. Both of them are baked deep into who this creature is. The first is from Nøkken in southern Sweden at a lake called Järtasjön, Heart Lake. It was written down by a folklorist named Hellström in 1985, but it's much, much older. A strong, pretty farm girl is plowing her family's field by the lake one spring afternoon. The work is hard. Her draft horse is old. The sun's hot. She's sweating. And out of the direction of the lake, a beautiful spotted horse comes wandering toward her. Alone. No tag, no farmer, nobody in sight. She knows what it is the moment she sees it. She's heard the stories. She knows what you're supposed to do. Ignore it. And she keeps plowing. But the thing comes closer and closer. And then it bites the family horse on the mane. That's the line. She wheels around with her bridle in her hand and shouts at it. Get out of here, you wretch, or you'll plow so hard you'll never forget it. In that exact second, and this is the moment the story becomes pure horror, the brook horse swaps places with the draft horse. It's now in the harness, it's in the yoke, and it plows. But not at any human speed. It plows at the speed of something that is not even a horse. Earth and stone go flying through the air. The girl is dragged behind the plow like a glove on a child's wrist, her feet barely touching the dirt, the breath knocked out of her. In less time than a rooster could crow 7 times, the entire field is finished. And then the horse turns toward the lake. It's going back into the water, with the plow, with the harness, with her. But the girl has a piece of steel in her apron pocket. She knows exactly what to do. She grabs it, makes the sign of the cross, and the moment the steel and the gesture come together, she falls free to the ground. The brook horse breaks out of the harness, gives one furious bellowing scream, and then disappears into the lake, taking the plow with it. The deep furrow it left behind, the locals will tell you, is still visible today. Anyone can go and see it. They've been pointing it out for 200 years. The second story is from a Swedish national park called Tiveden, at a lake called Fagertern. The name translates as something like the beautiful pool, but the lake isn't beautiful. The water is dead, and the lilies that float on it aren't white the way they are elsewhere in Scandinavia. They're red. They're the only naturally blood-red water lilies in the entire country. There's a reason. There once was a poor fisherman. Many children, sick wife, a lake that didn't give enough fish. One day, alone in his oak dugout in the middle of the lake, the Neck came to him. The Neck offered him a deal. A full net every day for the rest of his life. In exchange for the fisherman's daughter. On the morning of her 18th birthday, he was so desperate that he said yes. The years passed. The daughter grew up. She was kind, she was beautiful, she was clever. And the father, every morning, held its nets bursting with fish and knew exactly what he had done. On the morning of her 18th birthday, she walked down to the lake. Nobody had told her what was coming. Nobody needed to. She knew. She pulled a knife from inside her dress. She called out across the water, "You will never have me alive." And she drove the knife into her own heart and fell forward into the lake. From that day on, the water lilies of Fagertern have been red. If you go to Tiveden today and you stand at the shore and you look across the surface, what you're looking at is the answer an 18-year-old gave to a deal her father made before she was born. You're looking at the blood that stayed. What you need to know before we continue. Before we wrap this up for today, we need to talk about something practical, about protection, because none of these stories were ever pure entertainment. They were instructions. They told peasant children how to stay alive. And the Scandinavian toolkit for keeping the Nøkken off you is small, specific, and almost identical across the entire region. Iron and steel are the most reliable defenses. If you arrive at a Norwegian lake and wanted to swim, the right thing to do was to drive a knife into the bank first. Throw a steel needle, a pair of scissors, a knife into the water, that breaks his power. Throw a piece of steel between a brook horse and his lake, that breaks the connection. The pan-European cold iron taboo applies, but it works on him in a very specific way. It seems to interrupt the supernatural pull, the sticky skin, the magical weight that drags a victim down. Calling out his name is the verbal half. There's a Norwegian rhyme that mothers used to teach their children. Roughly, "Nick, nick, needle in the water. The Virgin Mary casts steel in the water. You sink, I float." The Swedish version is shockingly aggressive. It's basically a gangland insult that you scream at the water to break the spell. Roughly, "Neck, neck, you needle thief. Your father was a steel thief. Your mother was a whore who walked the farms doing evil. Neck, you are bound." The Finnish charm is a kind of a trait. You say it before you swim. "Necky to the land, me to the water. Don't come and take me." And when you climb out of the water, you say it backwards. In Iceland, the method is the simplest of them all. Say his name out loud. Nikur, Nenir, Kumbur, Vatnaskrati. Any of those spoken aloud are enough to send him bolting. In the Faroe Islands, the rule is even looser. Apparently, any word that sounds like his name will work. There is a famous Faroese tale about a small child who saved his older brother by mispronouncing the name Niklas as Nikur, while the brother was already climbing onto one of those sticky grey horses by the shore. Today there is a silver statue of the Nikur on the northern tip of Lake Sørvágsvatn on the island of Vágar. It was put up in 2017. The plaque tells you the exact story. But all of this, the stele, the name, the Virgin Mary, got a second layer painted over it after Scandinavia became Christian. The sign of the cross breaks the spell. Church bells drive the Nikur underwater. A Bible in your pocket can save your life. And most chillingly, there was a custom around naming newborns. When a child was born, it had to be carried to the church for baptism. The journey was considered the most dangerous trip the child would ever take because an unbaptized infant was vulnerable to the Nøkken and to every other creature out of the in-between world, in fact. So you wrapped the child tightly in woven bands. You carried a steel knife or a pair of scissors with you. And this is the part that always stops me. You did not, under any circumstances, speak the chosen name out loud before the baptism was complete. Not once. Because if a water spirit heard the true name of an unbaptized child, he could call it. He could pull on it. He could drive the mother through the woods at night sleepwalking, all the way to the water, and she would never be able to explain why. There were children who never made it. There were also children, and this is the unspoken layer underneath the folklore, who were drowned as infants by their own mothers, out of shame or out of poverty, or because there simply wasn't enough food. Those children, the tradition says, didn't move on. They stayed in the water. They became small weeping ghosts. In Norwegian, they're called myling, the unbaptized dead. And in the imagination of the people who told these stories, those small ghosts became the Nøkken's silent family, the ones beneath the surface that you could never quite see. We know now why these stories were so urgent. We have the data. In modern Swedish drowning statistics, about 55% of female drowning victims are suicides. The number was almost certainly higher in the 19th century, and nobody wanted to say it out loud. The phrase "the Nøkken took her" was, for centuries, an act of folkloric mercy. It allowed a family to bury a daughter who had drowned herself in consecrated ground. She hadn't fallen, she had been taken by a creature that no one could control. And right there, right at that exact point, the Nøkken stops being a children's monster and becomes something much larger. He becomes a way of managing grief. He becomes a story that you can live with at the kitchen table, evening after evening. And it becomes, and this is what part 2 is about, something that the greatest artists in Scandinavia could not stop thinking about for the next 200 years. Final thoughts. I've told you today who the Nøkken is and where he lives. I haven't told you what he could do, because the most frightening thing about this creature isn't that he can be a horse. It isn't that he can be a bearded old man with water dripping. It isn't even that he can be a beautiful woman who screams like a drowning person. The most frightening thing about this creature is his violin. There's a story from the year 1724 in a small mountain valley in Norway called Hallingdal. There's a wedding. The wedding goes wrong. There's a knife fight. Men die. The fiddle player goes down into the cellar to tap a fresh barrel of mead for the survivors. And on top of that barrel, someone is sitting. He's waiting for him, holding a violin upside down under his chin. In the next episode, I'll tell you who was on that barrel. I'll tell you what the fiddle player learned. I'll tell you what happened when he came back upstairs and started to play. And I'll tell you about the 11th tune, the one no one is allowed to play, ever, because it brings the dead back up to dance. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And turn the lights on before you go to bed tonight, because now that you know his name, he can hear you. And I'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Yours, Chris.